Okay, hello. Let's talk about Coleman Hawkins' Body and Soul from the Smithsonian Collection of Classic Jazz. It's also on a Bluebird record called Body and Soul. This particular version of Body and Soul, again, this is from Jazz 101, John Swed, A Complete Guide to Learning and Loving Jazz. Like I said in the video about Sonny Rollins, and whenever I refer to Jazz 101, I encourage you to check out John Swed's writing. He's an excellent writer and researcher on jazz. Swed writes about the Coleman Hawkins Body and Soul video that we have on our Week 1 YouTube playlist. Body and Soul is a remarkable recording for many reasons, not the least being that in 1939 it made its way up the pop charts and echoed across the country on jukeboxes, where it would be heard for many years after. It was extraordinary for a pop hit, too, in that it never completely states the original song's melody. It was a report on the state-of-the-art tenor saxophone playing of the time, an exceptionally coherent, composerly, and satisfying improvisation. It is Hawkins all the way, beginning softly at the bottom of the horn with rounded, almost leisurely notes, but as the solo unfolds over two choruses, he slowly moves his improvisation higher, louder, faster, and, toward the end, his notes stabbed out, his vibrato rich and emotional, he arrives at a properly dramatic conclusion. Hawkins was to record this piece again several times, including once unaccompanied, but never with the force and cohesion that this original recording offered. Okay, let's interrogate what Swed has written. Body and Soul is a remarkable recording for many reasons, not the least being that in 1939 it made its way up the pop charts and echoed across the country on jukeboxes where it would be heard for many years after. Well, does this sound like a pop hit to you? To us? Well, it was. It was 1939. It was the beginning of America's involvement in World War II. It was the height of the swing era, as in our overly neat categorizations of chronology, sometimes we'll refer to the 30s as the swing era, when in fact it straddled the 20s, the 30s, and the beginning of the 40s, more or less. Anyways, as to what it is saying here, think about that it was a #1 hit on a pop chart. Think about the songs that are the top of the pops today, in whatever genre we're talking about, but not alternative or indie or this or that, like straight up pop. And to be clear, of course, there were less genres, at least sort of that were demarcated at the time. So the pop genre of the time, songs that were the most popular, incorporated many different styles. But again, think about what you've heard, Coleman Hawkins playing Body and Soul on the tenor saxophone. Think about that as the #1 song on the charts, not whatever is on the charts now. And in your discussion posts and responses, think about the implications of that. It says extraordinary for a pop hit in that it never completely states the original song's melody. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Think about a pop hit, any pop hit, today, yesterday, last year, when you were a kid, however old you guys are, right? Whatever, whenever. When did a pop hit not have words? Not have a lyric, right? When was instrumental music, music without vocals, popular music of any kind? When was it #1? Think about that in your research, in the look for instrumental pop hits, for instance, and see what comes up, and listen to them. And are they like Coleman Hawkins' Body and Soul in any way in their instrumental nature? Do they state the melody outright? More importantly, really, than anything, what Swed is getting at here. This is a pop hit that was improvised, right? This is a solo that Coleman Hawkins played on the tenor saxophone that he, like Sonny Rollins, on his tenor saxophone, crafted in the moment. Like Bill Evans' piano solo on Witchcraft, the other listening selection for this week, that he crafted in the moment. But even more so, right? Because the melody is never explicitly stated. This is, again, a trope in jazz. Rather than a decidedly European aesthetic in which precision is valued and aesthetic perfection is emphasized in instrumental, in the delivery of a melody, whether instrumental or vocal. Jazz values ornamentation. Jazz values extrapolation, so that whether we're talking about the collective improvisation, more than one instrument improvising at a time in early jazz of New Orleans and everywhere early jazz was until the 20s, basically, and then the advent of the solo via Louis Armstrong and others. So whether we're talking about collective improvisation like that, or an individual soloist-driven music like much of jazz from the 20s ever since, although not all. But again, kind of iconically, we think of a soloist and an accompanist, as we talked about in the Rollins video. Never stating the original melody means that you, as an audience member at a concert or as a listener on a recording, are venerating the process of extrapolating that musician is doing. And the fact that that is number one on a pop chart means that millions of people agree with that. And think about if that is the way that popular music functions today. It does not, and has not. For a very long time, there's a degree of stagedness, of put-togetherness in every aspect of pop music production today, of course, right? Whether we're talking about the performances themselves, the audio-visual considerations in how things are presented, the sound reinforcement, the studio wizardry, all the above. However we want to think about it, it is important to note that we're not talking about things that are made up in the moment. They are so meticulously crafted in advance, right? This is the thing. Pop music has a lot more to do in a lot of ways with a Western classical ethos of perfection being achieved in a rendering, whether it's a performance or something written down or something viewed or whatever the medium. So, a pop hit that's improvised. Remarkable. Think about that as you listen to this. Wow. Could I love this along with millions? You know? It says, it was a report on the state-of-the-art tenor saxophone playing of the time, an exceptionally coherent, composerly, and satisfying improvisation. Remember those words, coherent and composerly, also in reference to Rollins's solo, right? What makes Hawkins' solo here composerly and coherent? What makes Hawkins here and Rollins there? Why are they so together? They're playing with abandon, right? They're playing spontaneously, and yet, again, there's the implication. Sweat is valuing the sense that the improvisation is satisfying because the statements are organized, follow an internal logic or architecture, if not externalized or if not preconceived, right? And again, to touch on this idea of a pop hit being an improvised tenor saxophone solo one more time, something from this next sentence made me think of it, of course, is that when is state of the art, what does that mean? When is that valued, and can that be both? Because if let's say we talk about, what was the track I was listening to yesterday? A hip-hop track, what was it called? 44 Logic, 44 More. Sorry, I'm blanking on the name. When we view, or when we listen to, we view it on YouTube. When we listen to Logic, 44 More. Am I even getting that title right? 44 More. It is remarkably coherent and composerly, right? But it is not improvised. It is, though, in many ways, state-of-the-art as far as what the studio is doing. So let's think about the analogy, then, between Coleman Hawkins as what he played being, this is the tenor saxophone in 1939, and the hip-hop production de rigueur of today is the state-of-the-art of today, or whatever the analogy is. But state-of-the-art on the way one plays an instrument doesn't necessarily strike me as what makes a pop hit, right? Ever since jazz stopped being a popular music after World War II, essentially. So this is kind of not only the state-of-the-art for Coleman Hawkins representing the saxophone, this is the state-of-the-art for jazz as popular music. By the end of the 30s, it was as popular as it was ever going to be. It says it's Hawkins all the way, beginning softly at the bottom of the horn with rounded, almost leisurely notes. But as the solo unfolds over two choruses, he slowly moves his improvisation higher, louder, faster, and toward the end, his notes stabbed out, his vibrato rich and emotional, he arrives at a properly dramatic conclusion. I mean, it sounds like if this was an intro to lit class or, a literature class of some kind and we're addressing a text and the formal structure of a novel or something, we might talk about a novel in the same terms. They're saying that his improvisation built logically and emotionally and in a way that made sense and got higher, got louder, got faster, got wild and crazy sort of at the top, and then arrived at a dramatic conclusion, probably not leaving you on the precipice, but kind of walking us down to the end, however, slowly or quickly necessarily. We think about that arc as you listen to Hawkins. As far as a little bit of the musical terminology, think about what that means. He's talking about his vibrato was rich and emotional. Vibrato is the warbling of tone, whether from a vocal, from a singer, or from an instrumentalist blowing air into some kind of sound-making device. In this case, a tenor saxophone. There's a vibrating, a vibrato in his tonal delivery, the way the sound that he creates comes out of the horn, the timbre, the color of the sound, the quality of the sound. There's vibrato rich instead of vibrato less. Find some examples of other uses of vibrato, say in tenor saxophonists, for the sake of the discussion boards and posts and responses, and think about what that sounds like. Think about what vibrato less, vibrato rich, how are they different? It says Hawkins was to record this piece again several times, including once unaccompanied, but never with the force and cohesion that this original recording offered. Well, here is some conjecture in a way, right? Here is a conclusion of a brief sort of paragraph of notes about a recording that Sweat includes, in which he's saying that the literally hundreds of times that Hawkins performed Body and Soul after, and at least perhaps maybe more precisely, the many times that he recorded it after this particular recording, this is the definitive one. This has the force and the cohesion from this original recording. That is not hyperbolic. It may be true, but it is subjective. And so something to think about too. Think about the subjectivity about when we talk about music. Why? Why is it subjective? Why is it hard to say, well, Coleman Hawkins was the definitive state, the state-of-the-art tenor saxophonist from 1939. Well, what about Ben Webster? What about other tenor saxophonists who were state-of-the-art as well in other ways? It is true, probably, to say that none was more state-of-the-art, but there were other powerful exponents of the tenor saxophone in 1939. Still, Hawkins' work stands out. So, those some thoughts about Body and Soul. Give it a listen again and again and again, as much as you like. Listen to other versions. Expand on the one video that I've assigned about Body and Soul. Look at the song. Look at the song's history. Again, avoid Wikipedia, please. Avoid the changeable sources that are not necessarily, that are not academically peer-reviewed, right? But we're not only looking at academic sources, we're looking at what else can we find about this music, this song, about Hawkins, about this particular performance, about other performances, and cite those in your discussions and responses for this week. Okay, that is our brief video lecture on Coleman Hawkins' Body and Soul.